the information economy. The information engines, these were small to large, very large to network computers, developing over from 1941, the first ENIAC, or 1952, the EDVAC of John von Neumann, and others, systems which were isolated, which were well operated by experts who were well educated, and no user was allowed to interfere with these systems. So they worked. But then, unfortunately, the network systems came in, and we have now all these PCs in LANs and even in wireless LANs whatsoever, which need interoperation from people who are badly, if at all, educated. And everybody thinks this must go. But unfortunately, the systems are so complex that even Dimitris and I as experts cannot analyze what's going on there. But we rely on the fact that these highly complex systems can be operated by people without any education at all. And indeed, these people, they even refuse to learn. If you give them a manual, they throw it away. They say, let's try that error. One should not be surprised that error is the outcome. Now, nevertheless, in the first two phases, there has been a lot of change in the production. For instance, e-work, or telework, telebanking, telelearning, whatever. And the complexity has grown even in the second phase. And to give you, to apply now Ralph Nader's sentence in his doctor thesis, unreliable at any speed. In this system here, which is a Microsoft system, but it could be at the same time a Linux system, you have several gigabytes of information of operation running. And we trust that this is always working. But very often we see that in really urgent situations it crashes. And nobody has an analysis why. Even the experts in incident analysis also like me. Now, let me come to this model of Schumpeter, well-known, one of the most renowned national economists, Austrian, and the Russian mathematician Kondratiev. The model was retro-applied. This was applied for the last two phases of the industrial society. It was retro-applied afterwards by Nefiolov, a German-Bulgarian writer, to the first and second phases in order to apply this, as I also do, to the information society. Because you will see from the time constraints, which is already 50 years, we are in the middle of the second phase, and of course the third and the fourth phase are difficult to predict. Now, concerning the phase 1 and 2, this is very interesting, because in the first phase, the energy for the motion was extrinsically generated. You had a fire heated under the big kettle, the big machine, and then there was steam. Steam was high pressure, and this then made the machine run. Initially, when the machine was very heavy, it could only be used stationary, but after about 50 years it was reduced, miniaturized, we would say today to our technology, to now be carried on a lorry as to be able to move from a location to another, which is locomotion. And in the second phase, after about 50 years, starting at about 1810, then this revolutionized the transport. Now, very interestingly, and this is an observation for the very near future, then there is a strong change in the lean technology, because then the technology was now so mature that you could not get any more out of it. And indeed, the next innovation was that you produce the energy in the combustion room, which is diesel, Otto, and all these kinds of oil, where the motion is exploding in the combustion room, and then it's immediately driving the motion immediately. So it's intrinsic rather than extrinsic. And you will see that this seems to be a natural law, which also will apply to the second, to the industrial society. No, I don't think I'd accept that, saying that, of course, electricity is a major prerequisite for computation, and electricity networks is namely transporting this, is a major prerequisite. But this is far away, because these are phases 3 and 4, which are in some future. Now, if we follow this model, first of all, this is the essential thing about the paradigms, about the cycles. A lead technology is one which is powerful, which you can first show that it works with few examples, then it's exploded. There is an expansion in applications and in different areas, and then afterwards you can only make this mature by improvement of the quality. You will have seen that Dimitris also had these minor cycles. You have these minor cycles below this, but this is the general 50-year cycle of Kondratiev. Now the interesting thing is when we look at the phase 1, then we see surprising analogies. The heavy machines were very well operated by experts. Fortunately, they were not as damaging as the first the vapor-driven machines in the factories. And also the network were not as damaging, at least on the first side, as you may see. It all started about 1940 plus. For me, it started in 1939 with Konrad Zuse Z1, but this did never work. 1941, the ENIAC, 1942, the Zuse Z3, and some others. And it was, and the dimension shrink because, as Moore tells you, when you wish to improve the speed, then you must reduce the size between which to store or between which to switch. Now then, starting in 1980, and this means that about in 2020 will come at the end of this lead technology, the networks. This is then the agent technology, the LANs, the WANs, the mobile technology, and whatsoever. Now, interestingly enough, the technology of the network is nothing else than taking John von Neumann's EDVAC, the Electronic Discrete Variable Automatic Computer of 1952, prolonging the bus which combines the processors, the storage, the I/O devices into many connections over a very long distance. So the internet is nothing else than just combining these different storages and processors to process server, client, whatsoever unit, and then combining them on a universal bus. Okay? So this is in the logic that the second generation, namely the networks, are nothing unforeseeable in the first generation, namely the von Neumann machine, which is the principal concept of the first generation. Now, interestingly enough, the question is, how long will this technology help us? And indeed, you may have heard that this morning the speaker from Hewlett-Packard mentioned Moore, Jim Moore. There is a law which says that every 18 months you succeed in doubling the speed or further developing the speed by one order of magnitude, but at the same time, following Gross law, it becomes even more difficult, more costly to do so. Now, what does this mean? If we have a distance, this distance, and we wish to make it faster, we halve the distance. And then, of course, any connection between the two atoms, let me call it these atoms, which are half the way away, they are much faster, namely the double of the speed. Now the question, what is the limit of this development? Now interestingly, it's when we switch between two atoms. Two atoms is the smallest distance where we can switch in this electronic world, because what we used to switch is we spin off an electron from the outer shell, one of the outer shells, the P shell or the D shell or whatsoever, and then we transport it to another which is positively loaded and recombines, and this is then the stream of the electrons which you can use to transport, for instance, data. Okay. Now, interestingly, when you come, when will this be at the present speed? If we could continue, the year is 2019. Now this means that we have about 14 years. But unfortunately, by packing ever closer together, we get problems in transporting the electricity and in transporting the heat which we produce with this switching. So very likely, even Intel admits on their website, Moore was the founder of Intel, that they only expect that this development of speed by electronic improvement will continue at least through the end of this decade, and the estimation is 2012. very likely after 2012, we come to the end. We cannot more switch with electron stripped off from the outer shells. And then the question, what is then the next change in the paradigm? Because I mentioned that in the industrial society, the extrinsic energy changed to intrinsic energy in order to produce indeed the same, but at even better production. And very interestingly, when we go into the atom, become intrinsically, we can do this. But when we use nucleons, neutrons and protons for storage and for processing, then there is a totally different law. Presently, we have a law which is dictated by causality. Causality means if you have a status, if you can determine a status, then there is a consequence, but if it's not the status, then it's the counterpart of it. If A, then B, else not A, then C. This is the normal clause of programming. It's causality. But in the atomic era, you have no causality anymore. You have the so-called uncertainty principle. You cannot determine whether there is A or not A, because in some measurements it can be A and not A, which means that all our programming languages and all our systems will be obsolete, at least in the lower level of the high-speed processing, storage, transportation. They will be obsolete at the end of this year. That this is beneficial. You have seen in my presentation that I use color coding. Green is a hope for a good future. And this is what people think the internet is, the wide area net is. And red is alert. And blue is what we must do by research. Now I will come back in a minute, but this aspect concerning using the internet for establishing relations between A and B, whether A is a bank customer or a student and B is a teacher or the bank itself or a producer or whatsoever, this has a deep impact on the interactions in society. Because previously all our relations were personal relations. When we wanted to have a trustworthy relations, we went to a lawyer, we went to our bank, we went to our merchant, we went to our boss, whatsoever, and we dealt this in a personal, two-sided relations face to face. Because we knew, we had learned how to establish trust, how to understand whether we can trust one person in a face-to-face communication. This is replaced by digital relations, and you see a lot of them being implemented. Business to business is a digital relation which is established assuming trust between one enterprise and the others. Health to health, age to age, means that one doctor trusts the health system, trusts the hospital, whatsoever. E-care is also such a two-sided relation, which when you have your digital card, you must trust that the technology works and that the doctor and the health system and the hospital and whatsoever, that they fairly uses this not at the expense of your interests, but only within the limits. Other relations, like the relation of you as citizen and, for instance, your tax. Previously, you went to the tax office where you could complain to the tax employee, and maybe she or he would have had an insight or not, but nevertheless it was a personal relation, although it's a big bureaucracy forever. But now, with e-tax declaration, you also trust that the network does what you do, and this is an alienation, as it's called, I think, in sociology, so I must not go into this. More interestingly, our trust in our government, our trust in our election was that we ourselves could see what we had encircled or crossed on our voting sheet. But now, if you look into some of the countries, including the European Union, including the United States, we must trust that the equipment, which is a technical one, is working as we wish. And indeed, we have a lot of examples in the debug machines, which are so popular in the United States because they are produced by a Republican party leader for the Republican president. We have observed a lot of cases where the debug machines produce the winner, which indeed should have been the loser. And of course, in science, Also, our relation between the student and the teacher becomes a digital relation, an I relation. Or you see, I don't use the term E. Other colleagues speak about E-economy. Now, this is just an implementation. The essential thing is digital. E-electronic is just the implementation. And it will be digital even if it's in the Q, like quantum society, or the bio society. There are other alternatives which I cannot discuss here. Now, you see in data mining, which is indeed the attempt to use information as a resource in order to produce more information. For instance, done heavily in banking, investment banking, done heavily in insurances whatsoever. You get the data information from the information mines, which of course has no knowledge, but it's a large set of data which may become to knowledge for those who properly use it. Now, second part, that is risk, and I go very fastly over this. The first is that all our systems have characteristics which make them unmasterable. The systems have become so complex that even experts in security, like Dimitris and me, are not able to look whether, for instance, our system layer has a deficiency. Let me give you a very recent example. Only a week ago, we detected, an expert detected, that Sony had a device on their CDs called a so-called rootkit, which, when you put the CD of Van Zandt and other good bands, well-known bands, when you put this into your computer, then the Sony CD will install a so-called rootkit, which deeply vests itself into the operating system, so it's not easy. In fact, it's almost impossible to deinstall this afterwards, because by deinstalling, you have to lift so many ties which have been established that this whole system crashes. This has been observed by an incident, because one of our colleagues, Robinovich, saw that there is something strange. Now, interestingly, this was observed by people who themselves use hacker techniques. They are not hackers in the criminal sense. They are just experimental, looking what you can do at the expense of others, what you can do with these systems. They are not using this for criminal, for instance, for self-appropriation purposes, but just for experimentation. And by the way, many of our IT security people belong to this category. Not criminals, but very experimental and misusing, unfortunately, the possibilities. Now, the second is, the systems are so complex and we cannot control, but even worse, we now combine these systems with other complex systems, but with languages like HTML, which you all know, which is the language of the internet, but also the Microsoft language, like the Oracle script languages, these languages in SAP, all these so-called script languages, we interoperate them, and this means that we try to combine systems which are singly, even insecure, to a secure system which cannot work. Unfortunately, there are some effects which I will only browse very shortly through, which we cannot master at all. If there is a 15-year-old boy who has never been educated in computing at all, he calls himself Mafia Boy, he finds a tool in the internet called Trino, and there are several of these tools, finds to install them on 20 different computers, starts them, and hinders Amazon for several days, Amazon and others, for several days to do the work. Because the systems shoot messages or interoperation onto the related IP address, namely of that enterprise, and no service is possible. This is a very easy attack, and unfortunately, let me tell you that we have out of the about 100 million servers which we have presently in the world, at least 10 million are highly vulnerable and badly protected due to a very, very optimistic, there are more pessimistic statistics of this. And this means we rely on technologies where we cannot protect the customers nor the enterprises from attacks of this primitive kind, because this guy did not understand anything except that he got a description how to install this. Even worse, the hierarchical structure of the internet is a risk itself. You know, if you combine, for instance, if a bank in Switzerland and a bank in the United States interoperate, then there is a channel, this blue channel, which is established by establishing a link through the DNS server, domain name service server. And if nothing happens, then this works because the IP addresses, which replace these URLs, these logical URLs, are then stored in the so-called caches. But if you then attack these systems over there, then there is no possibility to get the email address. And indeed, in October 2002, there was a 1-hour attack, nobody of us can analyze because all the data are secret, which crashed 6 out of the 14 systems. 6 out of them. And this was only an experiment. If there is a serious attack, this would be similar to an attack on New York and London and Paris and many other cities simultaneously in making the economy inoperable. And of course, you know about this Pandora's box. Pandora is a Greek name. You know, it's a Greek goddess. She unfortunately somebody opened her box, and more than 135,000 specimens of malicious software fly out now. About 60,000 of them being spyware. And how do they get into the computer? You get a message from your bank, for instance, a German bank. And this says, we have to verify your email address. Please click on the URL down under. And I have separated this into 2 parts. The first is a normal URL, and the second is a hidden program which you cannot understand because it's encrypted, which indeed is a relay to another website, the website of the attacker.
Same happened in Greece last week.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Phishing, you may have heard of this. This has recently been discussed in the media. Password phishing, how is this done? Usually when you get to your bank, your_bank.com, you request a contact, and the bank requests the PIN and TAN, which you have. You give it, and then you get your bank transaction. Now, in this case, there is a little X, which you can observe, of course, which goes to another site. And as this other site is not your bank's site, they don't know your PIN and TAN, but they are clever enough to say, dear customer, we must modify your account in order to protect you from a hacker attack. Please input your PIN and TAN. And if you do so, you're open to the attack because you are deliberately giving your secret information. Now, the unfortunate thing is, it's even worse. Because yourbank.com, there may be a character which is not the A. It may be a Greek alpha or a Russian A. But the Russian A and the Greek alpha behind your bank at the A leads you to a different URL. So, but you only see on your ASCII code terminal that this is represented as an A. If you had a Greek representation also, then it would have represented your_B alpha and K.com, or B R in the Russian sense, or whatsoever. So unfortunately, you cannot see this. So you click on this because this looks exactly like the URL which you are used to, although it isn't. And this is a technology which is very difficult to find, except that you, for instance, install your browser accepting only ASCII characters, which is a wise advice now. And moreover, we now have a series of malware which hits your mobiles. Most modern mobiles are programmed under operating systems with little script languages. We call them ZymOS, Symbian-OS, or Windows CE, or whatsoever. And we just made an experiment. One of these Trojans, indeed, it's not a virus, with 52,000 modifications can be seen as giving the skulls on the screen if you go to proper mode. Now, 2 of these variants, of the 52 variants, are very surprising. The one reorganizes your dictionary. So your wife's telephone number is associated with your girlfriend's telephone number. and you wish to call your wife and say, or the girlfriend or whatsoever, and this may be a bit difficult, and the other way around for boyfriends. Now the other is even worse. It sends to every entry in your dictionary, in your telephone dictionary, an MMS, and this is costly. So this is what we call a payload. Because if you have 150 partners in your dictionary, and there is an MMS, a multimedia message, not just a simple SMS, then this is indeed a costly, you will have to pay afterwards. So let's go to the contemporary solution to the final part. First of all, today we try to solve these problems by what I call the Tower of IT. You know, the Tower of London is well equipped with dogs, with people, with a wall, with water around, with people with a machine gun, and only after you have passed this and several doors deep into the cellar, you come to Her Majesty the Queen's crown. You can steal it, whatsoever. Okay. Now, we try to shield our complex systems by protecting them, putting around a crypto box, an antivirus box, a firewall, an intrusion detection system. But indeed this cannot work, because when the systems are insecure due to complexity, yeah, then adding more complexity cannot make them secure. In some sense, this is to try to expel the devil with Mephistopheles. Although Mephistopheles may be a sum of small devils, but nevertheless it's the devil. So this cannot be the way, and the question is, what can be the way? Now, first of all, evidently, the heritage of the industrial society is that the information society is determined in its technology by the supply side. The IBMs, the Microsofts, honestly also Hewlett-Packard and the others determine what is in the systems. And when they forget something, then of course they can hardly add this afterwards. You have seen the paradigms of Dimitris, how do you afterwards wish to install something which you can't, you must totally redesign the system. So, interestingly, the system should have the capability, if a system fails, if it collapses, then not every other, for instance, you're working on your Word document, but not your email communication, should at the same time collapse or something else. So, the system should reduce its functionality to what's wrong, but the rest should survive. We call this graceful degradation, and those information or data which have lost should be recovered, benign recovery. Interestingly, the first cycle, the mainframes had this characteristics, but all was lost when we went to the PCs, because the PCs could not include this. The second is, in these digital relations, you must assume that both partners in the relation behave trustworthy or with confidentiality. That is, if you send a request to your bank to transfer some money from one account to another, then the bank should not say, hey, I don't wish to. And the bank must rely that you afterwards don't say, hey, I wasn't that. I did not, I did not start this. Now, these characteristics are high-level characteristics on the user side, not on the technology side. We call this non-deniability. You cannot deny that you started the operation. And non-repudiation, you cannot say that you didn't get it and did not want to operate it. So what we need is a customer specification of the security on the application level, as we would say in the ISO model. And finally, we must have an assurance that what we get is what was specified and what was possibly certified. And my last folio is indeed that we need a quality standard for which the manufacturers of IT must pay when they do damage to their customers. So the unsafe at any speed, which is working very well in the car because of the customer legislation, should also work with Microsoft or Linux or whatsoever software. When they damage my, due to a fault in programming, my data, my production, my information production, they must be reliable, they must be liable for pay. And my final remark, fortunately enough, at least Microsoft has acquired so much money they can afford. Thanks for your interest. So I think we should immediately, Dimitris? You are in charge.
We may take one question.
Yeah. Oh yes, you have now to hook up. This will be a lengthy process.
Well, another exciting presentation delivered by Klaus. Unfortunately, the time was not enough to let him explain all his transparencies, all his slides. So if there are any questions. So I'll return the floor back to Klaus.
Okay.
The President, he says.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dimitris, for sharing. And our final speaker is Professor Jacques Verdeur. He is very well known in the community. He is a specialist in data protection. He was an advisor to the National Data Protection Commission. He's an advisor to the European Union. He was a professor at Universitaire, not at Facultaire, you know it better, in Namur, the University of Namur. He is a long-time fellow in IFIP and social applications, where he was a chair for 6 years. He edited many books, published many books, and he
I
also
think to restart.
doesn't work.
I think I have to restart it.
So I think he is well suited. His recent work is on governance and ethics in the information society. And this will be his address when the system is up.
Speak again. You can raise some question to Klaus in the meantime.
As you mentioned before, Klaus, when you need something regarding technology, you never have it. Now you need urgently something from the machine working under Zach's control, and we don't have it. So we talk about it, and now we hopefully will have it.
Yeah. This is a matter of availability and timeliness. But you see, the systems are not interoperable. He uses this magnificent Macintosh, while Dimitris and I rely on this down-to-earth, insecure Microsoft technology.
It comes.
Comes slowly.
The problem is I have to restart it. I am in trouble, it seems.
I advise the speakers.
It is about the governance in the information society, and I will explain perhaps a bit more. And I have changed a little bit the title. I would like to emphasize also social aspects as well as ethical aspects, because I think there is a link between those aspects. Well, I would say that the relevance of the topic is surely very high. And that is one of the reasons probably that the attendance to this session is not so high, because people are now just in the new session of the PrepCom 3, which failed at the end of September, because they couldn't get an agreement over the internet governance. There was, in the polite term of the ITU, they said that they had been vocal and urgent need for new management and oversight mechanism to better reflect the global nature of the internet. And they say, well, the others led by the US presently relatively united from generally supportive of the status quo, as it was before. the commentators said it was a real clash. And the proposal of the coming from the UK government, speaking in terms of the government advisory committee, was to try to find a new structure, double-sided, a multi-stakeholders forum to develop public policy, and most significantly, international government involvement in allocation of the IP addressing blocks and procedure for changing the root zone file to provide for insertion of new top-level domain names and changes of country code top-level domain name, TCL, TLD, as it is called, managers. Klaus just mentioned now one root, but we know that in the world there are 13 root servers, among which 10 are in the US, one is in UK, one in Sweden, and one in Asia. You must understand why the governments want to have also to be involved in the allocation of IP addressing blocks and procedure for changing the root zone file. That is understandable. Well, this question of governance was already on during the first session of the World Summit in Geneva in 2003, and they couldn't agree, so that they requested to have a working group on the internet governance, which has been working, and that is the result which was the matter for the PrepCom 3, on which they couldn't reach an agreement in September of this year. Well, the terms of reference were given, doesn't matter so much. I just mentioned also the plan of action of Geneva was already mentioning social and ethical dimensions of the information society, saying that all the actors in the information society should promote, that is what you already also mentioned, the common good, protect privacy and personal data, and take appropriate actions and preventive measures as determined by law against abusive uses of ICT, such as illegal, and they were very precise in the terms, as illegal and other acts motivated by racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, hatred, violence, all forms of child abuse, including pedophilia and child pornography, and trafficking it and exploitation of human beings. Well, all that is not really protected in the internet until now. Well, let us come now to what they decided in the working group on the internet governance as a working definition of what they call the governance of internet. Internet governance is the development and applications by governments, private actors, sector, civil society in their respective roles of shared principle, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolutionary use of the internet. What is interesting, is that since the first summit in 2003, every question related to the internet governance has mentioned as main actors, governments, private actors, and civil society. So we are in the atmosphere of change, of governance. And that is why probably the word governance has such a strong focus today, because people try to find a new way of regulation, a new way of ruling. You see, governments, private sectors, and civil society. So let us come to perhaps a clarification of what is governance, which kind of regulation. According to Lawrence Lessig and Joel Reidenberg, they speak about regulation of governance in terms of technical code infrastructure. Second, market, commerce, business, self-regulatory measures. And finally, legal measures. Pierre Trudel from the University of Montreal distinguished 7 levels, but I think that it is sufficient for us to have the question, the proposal of Lawrence Lessig and Joel Reidenberg. Now, shall we speak of the governance of the internet or of the governance of the information society. When you look at the European documents of the European Union, mainly of the Infoso, the DG Director General Information Society, when they speak about the new regulatory framework, the title is Governance of the Information Society, Regulation of the Information Society. Whilst the World Summit is speaking in terms mainly of governance of the Internet. Sometimes when people say, well, the governance of the Internet is anticipating what will be the governance of the information society. Well, I think it's a different question, but we can accept, we must accept that today it is still a bit fuzzy and confusing. So, it is already something which is not easy. I will follow, I will show you now what has been written by one friend, which is called about the governance of the Internet, what he calls an actor's nebula, you know. But you can see that, you know, it is centered around ICANN, the Internet Association for Assigning Name and Numbers, you know. And with its status, the role of the United States, here all the organizations which are represented in the executive board of ICANN, and then those ones in yellow also are in organizations which come in the scope of the ICANN, and then you have, of course, you must have the United Nations with the ITU, European Union, which is now the representative which holds the secretariat of the GAC, the Governmental Advisory Committee, and then you have some society like here, ISOC, the World Wide Web Consortium, the European Telecommunications Standard Institute, but the most influence role is given according to the yellow arrow, like here from the status of the ICANN, the role of the United States, the Department of Commerce, and also the technical delegation to some organization, private enterprise, which is not mentioned very often, VeriSign, which is a very important, the database of all the assigned the names and numbers which are given to it. So I would, well, I think I forgot someone. So I will go through the technical regulations as I mentioned now, the self-regulation and the legal regulations. Even the technical regulations themselves are a maze. But I think after the work we have done for a long time now, we have three main organizations which are interfering with the technical regulations of the Internet, which are the Internet Engineering Task Force, the World Wide Web Consortium, and ICANN, as I mentioned before. Well, Internet Engineering, we have done the work about those organizations in terms of what is their role, first, who are the actors, what are they doing really, how they are organized, you know, in terms of work, on which topics and so on. The Internet Engineering Task Force has a role, the promotion of standards and norms which assure the full interoperability of networks. It is an independent organization, private, supported by the Internet Society, without any juridical status. They work on transport, routing, security to users, Internet protocol. It is commonly said that the ITF is the protocol engineering and the development arm of the Internet. They have 133 working groups working in those 8 areas with some kind of 2,000 volunteers working on it. Since March, April 96 until November now, they have written what is called requests for comments, which are the standards themselves. More than 4,000. It has functioned until now along consensus method under the auspices of benevolent dictators, as was said by The Economist in June 2000. those benevolent dictators were Jonathan Postel, who has written most of the request for comment, and also one man that you have heard about recently, most probably, with Vinton Cerf, who is the creator also of the Internet. Well, the World Wide Web Consortium is writing recommendation about the World Wide Web infrastructures in domains such as web architecture, in its related technologies, the formatting of documents, HTML, and now in the time to come, XML, enhancing interaction, developing the accessibility for all. Is also responsible for writing the PICS, which is the filtering, the platform for internet content selection, who is acquainted with the writing of the filters. It is also an open organization without juridical status, which is hosted alternatively by ERSIM, which is a European Research Consortium in France, MIT in the USA, and Keio University in Japan. Who is member is open, but the range of the annual full membership fee is something like US $50,000. So it restricts the entrance in the club. Finally, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which is also an international private and not-profit organization, which has been created by the US Department of Commerce, when that department didn't want anymore to have that task led by them. It has the responsibility for the Internet Protocol, address, space location, protocol identifier assignment, generic and country code top-level domain name system management, and the root server system management functions, which I mentioned at the beginning. He also designates the organization which retains the control of the registry, for instance, the .org, the .net, who is attributed. And that is also one role that the states would like to have now, because the .eu, for instance, which has been discussed for a long time, is also an identifier for all the commerce, transitive commerce within the world. So to have the .eu means something when it accompanies the name of the organization. An example of the role in the Mar del Plata in board meeting, they had to recognize the AFRINIC as the regional internet registry in Africa, of course, change some bylaws, global IPv4 allocation policy, the proposed change to ICANN bylaws, etc., so regarding the generic name supporting organization, and then some proposed STLD, like for .job, for .travel, things like that. That is then to have in their role to accept the new well, I think airplane was or something like that recent. Well, who is there? 21 persons, 1 president, 14 voting directors, and 6 non-voting representatives. 1 project led in the United States by 5 universities under the guidance of Kleins-Heinz from GADEC in Atlanta. They made a study about a proposal for a structural reform. And they said, well, why? Because there is a concern about the unilateralism by the US government in its control of the DNS route, as I said, in its supervision of ICANN. ICANN, although it is a private organization, has to report to the Department of Commerce every year. There is also dissatisfaction of the representation of the government, which are only represented through the Government Advisory Committee I mentioned before. They have only advisory powers, so they cannot decide within the board. So they have to give their advice, and that's all. The perception also is that ICANN governance model does not properly balance the interests of the developed and developing countries and suppliers and users. About concerns also about the relationship between the country code top-level domain administrators and the national governments. The overall perception, finally, that ICANN lacks legitimacy, which is a criticism which goes far. But you can understand why there is such a struggle now in the question of the internet governance at the level of the World Summit. Well, I found a concise guide to the major internet bodies recently in one of the review of the ACM, Association for Computing Machinery, and they were mentioning exactly the same three main organizations which interfere in the technical regulation. So I think it is a bit clearer, if it is, this nebula, which is centered mainly around the technical regulations of the internet. But the question is that it is not only a technical regulation. The working group on the internet governance I just mentioned before has made an analysis about in its internet governance project, showing that there are issue areas covering human rights, intellectual property rights, international economic relations, the enforcement of order, and the operational policies for the internet. So you see, it is something which is quite larger than purely technical regulations. You have all the issues which are mentioned in the right column, which are attached to the issues areas which I just mentioned here. Well, they have made a table here showing all the different organizations which come in the scope when examining those issues areas. So I have just made a little enlargement here. You have human rights, IPR, international economic relations, enforcement of order, which I just mentioned at the issues areas. And the organizations which interfere here, which are state organizations at the worldwide level, like ITU, WIPO, United Nations HR, WTO, UNICEF, ODEC, European, and the Council of Europe also. Well, non-universal, like OECD and Hague Conference, as far as I can read. When you go there, you see, for instance, the IPR is mainly under the control of the WIPO, which is normal because it is its role. It has been attributed that role of going through that. UNESCO is mainly in charge of Human Rights Convention. What is written there? Optional protocol, I don't know exactly. UNESCO norms, diversity, convention, Commission on Human Rights, which is also in their scope. ITU here is working on the question of enforcement of order, the authentication and identification, PKI standards, and the global resource management, which is also in the scope.
Why did you use blue color, Zach, for the PKI standards and not green?
Authentication and identity.
You colored with
the color.
Blue.
The color.
The color is blue, it's not green.
Yeah, wait a minute. It means technical standardization.
Okay, thank you.
Green is policy development rules and recommendations. Yellow is resource assignments. Okay? So now I come to ICANN, which works in which domain? Here, who is database policy, TLD strings, which are in the scope of the human rights, UDRP, I don't know exactly what it is, which is something also in the second domain name proceeding, I think, I don't know, that's in the scope of the WIPO. But what is important is to see that ICANN is working in all the domain. So that is why the internet governance, in the hands of private organizations of ICANN, where all the governments are just expelled, is becoming really problematic. Real problematic. Moreover, the only people who control that is, you have the answer now, the Department of Commerce of the United States. That's all. That's so clear as it is. And that is why they couldn't reach an agreement during the Geneva procedure, the World Summit. So there was a specific group on the working group on internet governance, and now again they block. Well, my main purpose is here, which are some social and ethical issues in those technical regulations. I just mentioned here some of them. I already mentioned the question of the internet root server system with 3 main routers in the world. The rules for attributing .org or anything else to a specific organization. But I mentioned also, well, I haven't shown that IETF, the first organization mentioned, is working now on the standardization, normalization of IPv6, which will have at disposal something like 340 trillions of addresses. Addresses. My question is, to do what? For which kind of society? Will it be to make the tracing of all the products of the world? Will it be for helping you in your domestic life, so that from your mobile, where you have an IP address, you can give an order to a robot who has also an IP address in your house, who goes to the fridge, which has an IP address also, and in the fridge you have the chicken.
Plus sensor.
Yeah, and so that you put it in the oven, which has also an IP address. That is the shaping of way of living. I don't see how IETF, with 2,000 people, volunteers working around the world, are deciding for us about our future, about our living way of life, our way of living future. So I don't disagree with the work that they do, but at the same time, well, I think that they cannot work in such isolated environment. That is my main problem. That is why it is a social question. Well, there are many public policy concerns we have seen: competition, consumers, protection, IPR, privacy, freedom of access, in the hands of whom? DNS issues are identifiers of social identity, which are necessary also for commerce. It is easier to write the name of your firm than how many figures? 12 until now, in IPv4. That's 12. Well, private organization taking decisions shaping the future of our society. ICANN is problematic, as we have seen. Where are the developing countries in ICANN? Nowhere. Where is China in the process of standardization? You may be sure that China will not accept the standards as they are now. During the IFIP Congress in Beijing, we had a meeting with the Academy of Science. We were a bit afraid of the number of Chinese people who were attending the first track, which was about, what was it? It was about digital standardization, I think. Digital signal. There were more than 1,000. So they said, we are working on that, in that domain. You may be sure that we want to negotiate that. Well, as said by Lawrence Lessig in the Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, the possible architecture of cyberspace are many. The values that this architecture embeds are different, and one type of difference is what we call regulability, the difference in the ability to control behavior within a particular cyberspace. Some architectures make behavior more regulable, other architectures make behavior less regulable. These architectures are displacing and having these very important architectures of liberty. So it is not only a question of technical regulation. There are limits and validity of technical norms that we must establish. Well, we have spoken about technical regulation. We'll go a bit further now in self-regulation and a bit faster. What has happened since the beginning of the 90s? A kind of proliferation of codes, guidelines, charters. Well, the first one were in a way innocent, but with kind of ethical content like the 10 Commandments of the Computer Ethics Institute in Washington, D.C., the Principles for the Internet Area of the CPSR, Netiquette Rules by Rinaldi, the World Book Online Magna Carta, which was really evidential question about, well, I don't remember exactly. And the Euro ISPA codes, guidelines, and conducts, we will come back on those documents. Our group has been working, the SIG 922 on ethics of computing has been working on those codes, proliferation codes. Well, I just mentioned the 10 Commandments because the form of it is the form of the worship, which means it was a kind of really of law, of portable law that you have yourself. Well, the content of it is mainly something which now is defined in the Cybercrime Convention of the Council of Europe. But it was interesting to see that I would say the ethical content was at least loaded by the form it used. Well, the clauses are very fuzzy and vague, you know? But at the same time, well, this kind of code must be portable unless you put it in the basket. Well, I think that nobody is speaking anymore about the guidelines and etiquette of Rinaldi now. So we have been working on that. We have made an inventory and we have classified those codes in terms of informatics and computing in general and around the internet. I will go through some of the internet, like the Association of Service Providers, the ISPA, then the health sector and the e-commerce sector, rapidly. Here is what is called the Euro ISPA. ISPA stands for Internet Association for Internet Service Providers Association. So the ISPA is by itself an association by country of Internet Service Providers. And I've taken the code you have here, one for France, Italy, Austria, Netherlands, Ireland, and UK. And I've taken the UK one, just to see what they are speaking about. Well, they are also very